Hello out there, my beloved ghouls and goblins, and welcome on back to Top 5 Scary. I'm your casual Crypt Keeper, Taylor. Now, you loved the last time we tracked some unexplained UFO sightings that had all the skeptics speechless, so we wrangled up 5 more stranger than fiction, true stories of UFO encounters for you to sink your little feelers into. Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Top 5 unexplained UFO sightings that prove aliens are real. Part 2. You let me know down below in the comments which one of these stories has you convinced that there's something out there in the stars. Which of these has you wanting to believe? Let's dive on in. Number 5. The Phoenix Lights. If you ask most people what the most famous UFO sighting in the world was, they might say the Roswell, New Mexico incident. It's definitely the most referenced in pop culture. There's a CW TV show about it that's had like 10 seasons. Roswell is almost synonymous with the concept of flying saucers. But the most documented UFO sighting occurred in 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, when a series of bright lights in the sky were seen together by hundreds of people. Okay? This isn't just some passing dot, this was something hundreds of people corroborated on. Now, like any good UFO sighting, there's no real concrete answer as to what happened, and only speculation to go on. So let's run through the facts. It was on March 13, 1997. Hundreds of people around Phoenix described seeing these vivid bright lights, around 6 or 7 total. Now, reports claim that these mysterious lights were huge and big enough that they were blocking out your vision of the clouds, the stars, but they wouldn't produce any noise like a jet or a helicopter or anything. Big, blocky, silent. A few hours later on that same night, a second wave of sightings came over the city, describing a long trail of blinking objects that some said was a mile long and boomerang shaped. They were blinking in regular intervals, orange and blue lights. Air traffic controllers reported seeing these lights, but didn't detect any planes on the radar. And the air traffic controllers described this incident as inexplicable. But maybe the strangest part about all this, maybe just to me, is that the first person who called in the sighting was legendary 80s mullet owner and actor Kurt Russell, who was flying into the city with his son. Snake Plissken asked what the strange lights hovering over the city was, leading to Kurt Russell calling it in. The only thing he got back from air traffic control was, "We don't show anything." Now, officially, the military would claim that this was a test for high-intensity flares, but eyewitnesses weren't so convinced. The governor of Arizona at the time, who was a former Air Force officer, claimed that the aircrafts he saw that day didn't resemble anything he had ever seen in his life. So, what happened in Arizona that day? Was it a widespread enough hoax, government cover-up, or proof of life from beyond the stars? You tell me. And if you're looking for more UFO videos, you already know we have got that and then some. Click on through to the channel, we've literally got hundreds of UFO videos. You could be watching them for the rest of the evening. But if UFO stuff ain't your jam, we've got cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, pretty much anything you could want. So hit subscribe, hit that little bell, and don't miss a single thing. But do it at the end of this video, would you kindly? We got way more UFO sightings coming up for you. Number 4. Japanese Flight 1268. Our next sighting comes to us out of Japan. Well, the skies of Japan. It's a video about flying objects after all. It was in November of 1986 when a pilot on a cargo flight thought that he made a close encounter of the third kind. When Captain Kenju Terauchi and a skeleton crew were flying a cargo delivery of some fancy bougie French wines into Japan, when Captain Terauchi claims he saw shining bright lights surrounding both wings of the plane. Now, initially, Terauchi said at the time he thought that this was just US flown fighter jets patrolling around the border of the Soviet Union. But when he got a decent look at the craft, he realized these weren't friends of Uncle Sam. He said, "2 spaceships stopped in front of our face, shooting off bright lights." He continued saying, "The inside of the cockpit shined brightly, and I felt warm in the face." These aircraft in particular were described as being cuboid, I guess they're Borg ships, with jet propulsion systems clustered around a dark center. At the same time that these unidentified objects were soaring by the plane, these objects seemed like they were jamming the plane's communications in some way, as Terauchi and the crew couldn't contact ground control at all during the sighting, as if there was some electromagnetic field. The rest of the crew, however, wasn't quite as convinced by this strange encounter, with the co-pilot and flight engineer believing that the objects they saw were not but strange lights, and agreed that they were definitely unexplained and they couldn't find a reasonable possibility for what they were, but that they didn't necessarily think they were flying saucers. A committee looking into the phenomena claims that it was just light refraction through ice crystals suspended in the clouds, but that doesn't quite explain how the cockpit got warm or anything like that, or where the communications were going. So what do you think? Aliens or ice crystals? Number 3. The Betty and Barney Hill incident. It's sad how many people see a UFO and no one else in the entire world will believe them. You know, not their friends, not their family. That's why this case is different. A young married couple claims that not only they saw a UFO together, but they were abducted together. That's one for the memory books. You know, they say the couple that probes together stays together. It's a fairly well documented case. It even served as the inspiration behind the alien abduction story in American Horror Story Asylum. And how about Evan Peters, huh? Love that guy. Anyway, the real story revolved around Barney and Betty Hill in 1961. The two of them were driving home through New Hampshire when they both saw a blinding bright light flying above them in the sky. Betty started to feel dizzy, and the two of them soon found themselves asleep on the road. A moment passed, and they found themselves parked in their driveway 2 full hours later, not remembering a second of what had happened. The couple claimed that they had traveled to a star system 39 light years away called Zeta Reticuli. The two had connections and were able to get in contact with Air Force officials to report their strange sighting, and would spend the next few years trying to explain their case to anyone who would listen in the desperate hopes of getting some help and some answers. Barney would meet with a psychiatrist regularly who he told that he kept having nightmares where he was being operated on by small gray-skinned, slanted-eyed creatures that would take samples of his skin, his fingernails, his flesh to do with he did not know. So the psychiatrist had him undergo hypnosis therapy, his wife as well, hoping perhaps that something repressed could be unearthed, and maybe they should have left it alone, because what they found was terrifying. When going under hypnosis and waking back up, Betty was able to draw a scientifically accurate map of the star system from memory, creating a map that was nearly spot on to the real Zeta Reticuli. This incident inspired the Air Force to launch Project Blue Book to collect more stories of UFO abductions like this. Number 2. Kenneth Arnold. If you've ever wondered why flying saucers became the default term for UFOs as opposed to something like flying cigars or flying triangles, it has a very large part to do with this next story, which was one of the first big mainstream sightings of a UFO in 1947. Now, interestingly, possibly coincidentally, possibly not, this incident occurred only a few weeks before the infamous Roswell, New Mexico incident. So UFO fever was just on the brain around 1947. This happened to Kenneth Arnold, a clean-cut all-American aviator. He was flying a small private plane over Washington around Mount Rainier on a scavenger hunt of sorts for the wreckage of a downed plane, which had a fairly significant reward offered by the Army for its salvage, which Kenneth was after, of course. While he was prospecting, Arnold claims to have seen nine blinding bright flashes of light, flying in a bizarre pattern like the tail of a kite. Described as saucers moving at an incredible speed, Arnold tried to do his level best to assess what these things were from the seat of his aircraft, working out how fast they were moving, taking his watch and clocking from when they reached the peak of the mountain. He worked out that they were going about 1,700 miles per hour, which is pretty darn fast considering in 1947 humans had just broken the sound barrier at 700 miles per hour, and that was an unbelievable leap in technology. Whatever it was Kenneth saw, it was something far more advanced than anything he'd ever seen on Earth. When he'd landed, he told the crew at the airport about everything that he'd seen, suggesting that he'd seen missiles or maybe some experimental new tech. For weeks after, Arnold would become a media darling, being interviewed by several reporters, all hoping to get the big scoop on this. Part of what made this such a defining UFO story for the American people was how earnest Arnold was about his story. He was an honest man who provided straightforward facts, experience with aviation, a mathematical and rational approach to all of this, and very little in the way of wild speculation. Which is a shame, because I love wild speculation. Let's do a little more wild speculating with our last point. Number 1, the Betty Cash incident. In December 29, 1980, Betty Cash would see something on the outskirts of Houston near Dayton that would change the course of her life forever. She was driving with her friend, Vicki Landrum, and Landrum's grandson. At around 9 p.m., the three of them noticed a blinding bright light in the sky. Landrum believed it to be the second coming of Jesus, whereas Betty Cash described it like this: "We didn't know what it was, but we knew that it was something lighting up the sky. We all began to feel this heat, and all of a sudden Vicky screamed for me to stop. And when I stopped, she went forward, and her handprint was embedded into the dashboard of the car. And I thought, well, I've got to see what this is. So I got out, I walked towards the front of the car, and I stood there looking up to try and figure out what this object was, and then a diamond-shaped object appeared with flames shooting out. The heat was tremendous. When I reached for the door handle, it was so hot I couldn't even begin to open it. The only thing I was thinking while all this was happening was, are we gonna make it out of this alive? Landrum stated that moments later, a large squadron of black helicopters took over the sky above the area. After the choppers cleared, Betty took the Landrums home and retired for the night. The next morning, Miss Cash said she was extremely sick, suffering from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, and intense burning in her eyes. Now, bizarrely, Landrum and her grandson all reported the same symptoms. These symptoms would worsen pretty seriously, with large blisters forming on the skin, and eventually Betty Cash had to be taken to a hospital where she was suffering from cancer symptoms, where she lost large patches of skin and clumps of hair. Now, to date, there has never been a conclusive answer to what happened to Cash and Landrum. What caused the radiation sickness? Was it the military testing new technology? Was it a craft from another world? There are so few answers and so many questions, so you let me know what you think about these crazy cases. And that's about all she wrote for this one, my ghouls and goblins. Thanks so much for watching as always. You keep on creeping on now, and I'll see you in the next one, so long as I don't get abducted.